Hey everyone! So this week we are doing genre recommendations, and I am your resident dystopian expert, at least for today. I only have a handful of books I want to mention because I do kind of want to stick to recent releases. The first one is actually a sequel, so I'll briefly mention the first book. Delirium by Lauren Oliver came out last year, and I didn't care all that much for it until I got to the end, and I love the ending. And Pandemonium, the sequel, came out in March, and that one definitely was so much better. So, Delirium dragged for the first like 3/4 of the book. Pandemonium did not drag at any point throughout the book. I was so hooked on that book, and I don't think I set it down once when I was reading it. I read straight through. It was so freaking addicting. So, it's a bit of a darker dystopian. Delirium seems a little more fluffy in the beginning, but as you get to the end and then when you start Pandemonium, you realize it's actually a very dark dystopian, and it's a dark world, and it's kind of sad and depressing at times. But I adore that, and so those books were definitely for me. If you do like the kind of bleak dystopian worlds, I would recommend that series. I just have to tell you that if you can't get through a slow book, don't start Delirium. Now, another one is a sequel as well, and I think you may have heard of the first one. So, Divergent by Veronica Roth came out last year. I don't know if any of you have read it, maybe? Some of you? Okay. Well, Insurgent, the sequel, came out last week. Have you read that one? Maybe? Yeah, if you haven't, you need to read it. If you haven't read Divergent, you need to read that one. But if you've already read Divergent and you haven't read Insurgent, there's something seriously wrong with you. Like, I was dying to read that book the day it came out, and I read it the day after. 525 pages. I read it in about 4 hours, and I was at work when I read it. Yeah, that's how much I wanted to read it because I wasn't supposed to be reading at work. Veronica Roth is an amazing writer. I'm pretty sure I'd read a phone book if she wrote it. And she didn't write a phone book. She actually wrote a very interesting story that is so unique, and it's just impossible to put down. The books are huge. I will say that. They kind of scared me at first, but I should know better than to be scared of anything she writes because she's just awesome. And then there's this guy in the book. He's called Four. Yeah, he is enough reason to read those books. I want one. I'd really like to find a Four. So if anybody knows where I could find one, let me know. And if you're not big on the romance, it's not a in-your-face romance. It's just kind of sweet, and there's definitely a lot more going on than the romance. So don't worry about that. Don't let that scare you off. And I will say that this end of Insurgent is a bit of a cliffhanger, so it might piss you off a little bit, but it's worth it. Then I also read a debut novel actually, that ended up being dystopian, and it was Under the Never Sky by Veronica Rossi. And it's a very, very different dystopian. The world, well, most of it takes place in the wilds, kind of, and there are these people that the insiders call savages. And so they kind of make me think of this old time feel with like cowboys and Indians and stuff like that. But it is a futuristic world that has all this very interesting technology and this hierarchy that's just kind of insane. And it's just a really interesting world. It's probably one of the most interesting worlds I've read. And I didn't so much enjoy the story as much as I enjoyed where the story was set and the people. So I definitely thought the story was good, but it wasn't the best part of the book, in my opinion. So if you like a kind of a different world, I would recommend Under the Never Sky. And then last, I have The Selection by Kiera, and this one is for people who kind of like light and fluffy dystopian. It's said to be The Bachelor meets The Hunger Games, and I definitely see The Bachelor comparison, but in this first book, I don't see The Hunger Games. It maybe comes out in the sequel, which isn't out yet, obviously, but I definitely think anybody should ignore that whole Hunger Games reference and focus on the Bachelor part, because it's about these girls that are selected to be on this like reality show and live in the palace with the prince and kind of get to know him, and then he picks who he wants to have as his princess and eventually the queen. And there is a bit more going on than just this whole reality type TV show thing. There are rebels attacking the palace and the leaders, and nobody really knows why that's happening. So there's a bit of a mystery, and it's not really revealed yet, but there's kind of some buildup. And the world isn't really built up that much in this first book, but I think it definitely has the potential to be an interesting world. But like I said, this is definitely a more light and fluffy dystopian, not depressing at all. In fact, it's kind of just sweet when you get to the end. I just kind of felt like, oh, it's cute. So not your typical dystopian, but I did enjoy it. I know it's not for everybody though. It's gotten a lot of bad reviews, but I was one of the few that actually really enjoyed it. So if you think you might enjoy something like that, I'd recommend that, but I definitely understand if it's not your cup of tea. So those are some of my dystopian recommendations. Most of them are series, and you just kind of get to the end and you're like, wait, I have to wait a year for the next one. But I definitely think they're worth it. They're fabulous books. I definitely can't wait to see what's next from the authors. And if you have dystopian recommendations, whether they're old books, new books, whatever, please leave them in the comments. Like I said, I'm hoping to read more dystopian books this year, and I love recommendations from fellow readers. So that's it for me today. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you next week.